Hi, I'm Noah from the NEGRC. Thanks for watching our video. Remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when we post new videos. Also, be sure to check us out on Instagram at NEGRC_PGS.
The meeting may go a little short since this is the first time we're doing it. So I'll just go over the presentation and then there'll be a spot for questions at the end. And so with that, I would just like to say again, thank you for joining me. My name is Christin Holtzclaw. I am with the Georgia Department of Transportation with Office of Transportation Data. And so sort of why I'm here is just to talk about why it's critical for us to have an accurate representation of where the Georgia road network is located. And so that's going to be everything from federal, state, down to county and city roads, those public roads, and how that information helps support programs for state and federal reporting. So during this presentation, I'm going to be going over how the local road activity process sort of helps us and how the municipalities can help us keep an accurate record of changes that are made across Georgia. With the LRA process, it also helps us ensure accurate funding is assigned to all the local governments through the Local Maintenance and Improvement Grant Program. So that's the LMIG program. So their formula is based 2/3 on the centerline mileage and 1/3 on the population. And so sort of through this, you'll see how that centerline information, how we sort of get that from you for this formula. And so having said all that, let's dive right in. So overall, just some basic questions like what it is, why you should give us one, how to do so, and what you need to send along when you do that. So what even is an LRA? LRA is just an abbreviation for the phrase local road activity. And so what that means is anything physically done to the road. So from adding a whole new road, removing a road, and anything in between. That's sort of what we're talking about. There is a Georgia state code that says GDOT is obligated to maintain a record of all public roads within the state. And so this is sort of our impetus for formalizing the process. So why should you give us an LRA? Really what it boils down to is the most accurate mileage we have, the most appropriate funding you all get for your projects. So again, we've got this Georgia State Code. It says that local government agencies or LGAs should submit their road changes to GDOT within 3 months after a road is added, modified, or otherwise abandoned. Now you may be sitting there wondering, I'm pretty sure we've got a road that they may not have that's definitely older than 5 years. I've missed the deadline. There's nothing I can do. That's not true. So all that means is that it's just a guideline. That's when you should send us the data. We should get it within 3 months. That's not to say you can't send it early. That's not to say you can't send it late. That's just the ideal time that if you send it to us in that time frame, then you're going to get that funding for that year, right? So that's just how we're working with you to get the most accurate information for those inventory records that the state and federal reporting is based on. So the local grants office is who uses that centerline data that we maintain to formulate those LMIG funding amounts. So again, just more on why you should send us one in. So the idea is we just need you to help us help you. Another interesting aspect with Georgia is dealing with annexations. So the Department of Community Affairs is the organization that administers the city annexation program. So recently they've been informally sharing some data with us to help in understanding some of these annexations. However, the process is just sort of informal right now. Sometimes the data that they get isn't the data that we need in order to make these decisions. And so we're working to make a formal process. However, in the meantime, this has just been something we've been asking everyone to send us in the annexation documentations as an LRA, just while we work out that formal process. And then just as a final note, the road data is also seen on the Georgia state, county, and city maps that are publicly available on the website. So anytime you are looking at those, you can feel good that the data that you send us is ultimately reflected in these maps. So from here, let's just look at the process itself. Basically, something's going to change. The LGA will formally recognize that change and then send it over to us. We're going to make those updates into our database. Then at the end of the year, that gets sent over to the local grants office. They do their thing with the formula, and then ultimately you all get funding for your projects. So how do you submit an LRA? Of course, there's paperwork involved. We wouldn't be government without it. So we've got a local road activity form, in addition to some supporting documentation, and then that will just be mailed or emailed to our office. As a note, sometimes we deal with large sets of changes, right? And so it may seem daunting to have 100 new roads, and then you're thinking 100 LRA forms, and then 100 supporting documents. Don't fall down that hole. Just give us a call. We don't want you to fill out that much paperwork, and so depending, we can kind of work with everyone a little differently depending on how you can send us data. So just go ahead and give us a call so we can kind of see how we can help you get that large set of information over to us. In terms of supporting documentation, what that might look like, basically it's just going to be something that indicates where in the world the change has happened, and then just something to indicate that you have the authority to make this change. So that's going to look like either a signed notice from a mayor or a commissioner or a chairperson, and either the meeting minutes of the resolution, or it can also look like a signed delegation of authority. So that's going to be something where the authorized person signs off on another individual saying that they also have the authority to make those changes. And then lastly, if there's any city annexation documents, go ahead and send those along as well. So again, sort of two key pieces of supporting documentation. It's either going to be the meeting minutes or the signed notification of authority, and the location. So the location can look a couple of different ways, right? It can be something as basic as a hand drawing showing where and what's going on, to as detailed as the design engineer drawings. So really the key thing here is that we can figure out where in the world it is and what's going on. So if something goes wrong and we can't figure it out, honestly, the worst thing that's going to happen is we're going to have to call you. I know the prospect is scary, but that's fine. We usually don't run into that, but if something goes wrong and we really can't figure it out, we'll just call you to make sure that we're processing your change correctly. So up to this point, I've sort of been talking about the process itself generally, and then the key pieces of supporting documentation. So from here on out, I'm sort of going to pivot into what kinds of things happen in order for you to fill out these forms. Like why you would need to send us an LRA. Here's pretty much our most common example of when we get LRA forms. It's just new roads. So here we have the addition of a subdivision. And so on the form itself, you're just indicating that there are several roads the total amount of that addition, and then indicating on a list the individual roads and their individual mileages. So fairly straightforward, the form. This example is for changing ownership, and so I'm hoping with this one you'll see why the annexation stuff is a little bit tricky for us. So for changing ownership, this city has gained some acreage, and with that, some ownerships have changed. And notice as well, there's no spot on the form directly for changing of ownership for mileage. And the reason that is because sometimes you can be gaining ownership or losing ownership, and so that's going to be either a net gain or loss. And that will just be indicated separately. So here we're only looking at gaining mileage. And something to point out is with this annexation, they did not take these roads. And so in indicating that in the list, we know exactly where we need to be looking to make those changes. And again, Georgia is a little bit unique in that, so that's sort of why it makes it like that. We're definitely working on the formal process, so it's less of a headache in the future. But in the meantime, this is sort of how we're hoping to address that. So moving along to another fairly common example is extending roads. So here there's kind of a couple of different things going on, but for simplicity's sake, let's just look at this single extension. So again, the form is pretty basic itself, just indicating what road is being affected, kind of giving us an intersecting road so we can figure out where it is, and then the length of the extension itself. So this example is one example that couldn't be seen for abandoning roads. It's not the only example, but it is a pretty good example for what it does. So here we have a residential community, and at some point, this community has decided they want to gate their area. The local government has decided due to the gates, they no longer wish to utilize public funding to maintain them, and so they choose to abandon the roads. So due to those restrictive gates, these following roads specifying their mileages and also indicating the total mileage are being abandoned by this LGA. So here we have obliterating roads, and I want to note, so the previous example is abandoning roads, and you notice the road bed was still there, and so that's the key difference there. So with abandoning roads, the road bed may still exist for people to use or not use, it's just there. With obliterating the roads, that road is actually physically being removed. And so again, in terms of the form, it's fairly straightforward. We're just showing those individual streets and mileages as well as the total. So the last examples have all directly affected centerline mileage. These last three examples, you notice they don't directly affect the centerline mileage, but they do affect key data elements that we collect and report on. And so this one is surface type. We've got a previously dirt road that has since been paved. So the form is fairly straightforward, just indicating that the surface type changed and where it is. Similarly with road name changes, so just indicating the road name and where it is. And now you may be wondering how we may know what the road name changed from and to. And generally with these things, that's seen in the supporting documentation. So for instance, with the road name change, that might be in a resolution that's attached. And it'll say, for instance, like road name change from Main Street to Central Street or something like that. And then if it's not the entirety of the road, it'll also specify from intersection to intersection, right? And so then with this last example is adding lanes. So here the example is showing an entire lane being added on both sides of the road. So in terms of the form, just indicating that a lane was added and where that road is. Also, as a note, here is another example you may see and be able to use if you're widening the roadway itself. Not necessarily adding a lane, but maybe widening the lane width. You can also indicate that here and send that in to us as well. So that is it in terms of my presentation. So now I leave the floor open to any questions. I see there is one already in the chat from Toby Cartledge. Does this include developments that are roadways identified as private? So no, there's no obligation. So you notice like strictly in the definitions of codes, it only specifies public roadways, right? We do, if you have information on the private roadways, you can send that in to us. We definitely will not turn that down because ultimately we want to have the most complete data set. And so it's definitely not hurtful, but in terms of benefiting you in getting funding, it won't make a difference. I hope that answers your question. So a follow-up is where or how would we get current mapping of our area? You can call or email me and I'll be able to see how we can work with you in order to get you data, because we can give you shape files or maps or just however you can get the data from us and give data to us so we can compare. That's how we like to do that. Yeah, if you want to drop your contact information in the chat as well, I can follow up with you via email. And again, it'll also be forwarded out in the presentation.
Are there any other questions? Well, Kristen, thank you very much for being on the presentation today. Thank you, Paul Tanner, as well. I will send out the slides as soon as I receive them, and we're also going to post this video to our YouTube page, and we will send the link out to that as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and thank you for attending.